Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Dr. Bruce Olav Solheim, a history professor, former Fulbright scholar, military aviator, defense contractor, and author of the timeless paranormal trilogy, among many other books. Today, we will be talking about star beings, a leap of consciousness, and Anzar The Progenitor. Bruce, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Johnny. It's great to be back.
We had a very good reception to your last episode. I believe it was number 10, so I'll be sure to leave a link to that in the show notes also. The Timeless Trilogy and your latest paranormal book is Anzar The Progenitor, which presents your personal experience with an ancient alien mystic, UFO sightings, alien abductions, animal spirits, ghosts, hauntings, demons, mediumship, and the conclusion that you made was that the spirit world, the alien world, and the quantum world are all the same. So how did you become involved with this?
It's not that I believe in ghosts, it's that they believe in me, so I didn't have a choice. So I was kind of, I guess, born into it. My mom was very psychic, and I just started having paranormal experiences when I was very young. The earliest one I could remember was when I was 4. It was an angelic healing type experience. It just accelerated from there. The door was open for me, and I thought everybody had these kinds of things, and I think a lot of people do, but not everybody talks about it. So I guess I was born into it. I've come to accept it and learned how to manage it because it can be very overwhelming. So the sooner you can learn how to manage it and turn it off when you need to, the better.
I remember you telling me about once you went into a party, which you used to really like going to parties, but you were overwhelmed by everyone else's thoughts where you just thought, I need to shut this off now. You mentioned that the ghosts actually believed in you. I've never heard anybody say that before. Do you think it might have something to do with your mother being psychic and how that is often handed down through the bloodline?
No, I think you're absolutely right. They can identify you pretty easily. And the aptitude, I guess, or the inclination or the gift, quote unquote gift, depending on how you look at it, I think does get handed down. So it makes it easier. And the fact that my mom was accepting of it and kind of worked with me, she would actually have playing cards and we'd read each other's minds. So she was actually training me without making it into a big spectacle like, ooh, we're going to do some spooky stuff. It was natural. It was just like we were playing gin rummy or something. We just would read each other's minds. And my dad didn't like it, of course. You know, he's very practical. And I think it's one of the few things that scared him. So it's partly just a natural thing that I think some people have a little bit more than others. I like to use a baseball analogy. Everybody can throw a ball. Some people can throw it 90 miles an hour. And everybody has a special skill. Everybody's got something. And that just happened to be something that came down through my mom's side of it.
In other words, unlike some of the so-called normal kids, instead of playing Monopoly, you two played cards and read each other's minds, and you thought it was completely normal.
Yeah, that is true. And philosophically now, and having done the research, I think it is very normal. It's just that we get conditioned to push it out of our lives from a very young age. That's one of the lessons I learned from my mom is when I started going to school, I knew that you couldn't really talk about all this stuff. You had to be careful. She kind of had a protected zone, or I guess what we now call, although I don't like the term comfort zones, because I think that kind of stifles growth. But in this case, it is kind of important because if you have this gift, you don't want to be made out to be some kind of a freak or ostracized or made to think that you're crazy. Mothers are very protective, and paranormal mothers or psychic mothers would have to be even more protective.
There are those of us who do believe that these gifts, the psychic powers, the skills of a medium at one time, thousands of years ago, were completely normal. Telepathy was as normal as people going on to social media today. Who is Anzar and how did you come in contact with him?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, I was reluctant to even talk about my paranormal experiences, but my friend Gene, who died in 2016, convinced me to do so. He told me, even gave me the name Timeless, but he said it was time to start telling my stories. But I was still a little reluctant. I'm an academic and I didn't want to lose my job or have people think I was nuts or whatever. So I had to slowly get into it. In the first book, I talked about ghosts, just things that are more generally acceptable that a lot of people think, oh yeah, I think maybe that's true. And I got progressively more bizarre experiences. Then leading up to the last timeless book, I'd mentioned Anzar, this ancient alien mystic who I've been in regular contact with. Then I decided I'm just going to go for it. So the fourth paranormal book is just about Anzar, kind of the theoretical framework for it. And the other half of the book is the transcripts that I've been doing over the last 3 years from these spirit walks where I connect with them. I started by dipping my toes in the water and then dove in head first at the last book.
Where do you suppose this being comes from? And you mentioned ancient. So that seems to imply that this being could be at least thousands of years old.
Yeah. In the spirit world, the sense of time is very different than the way we experience it, kind of in a linear way, objective reality that doesn't make any sense. It's all just happening at the same time. But he is an ancient alien, so he calls himself the progenitor. In fact, before I knew his name was Anzar, I just knew him as the progenitor, which means the first, the one that brought it into being. So he was the first contact here on Earth. So that would make him, I would say, hundreds of thousands of years old, at least. As far as where he's from, I've tried to pin him down. And he said the Orion system and the Rigel system within Orion. He said that is his origin. I've always wondered because I've been so fascinated and kind of focused on the constellation of Orion since as long as I can remember. So it all seems to fit kind of nicely together. So he is very ancient. And I know we're going to talk probably about the term alien. In fact, when I asked him about it recently, he gave me a very funny response. And he does have a sense of humor, which is, good for us.
Definitely good.
You don't want angry aliens.
No, you don't. Since you brought it up, I had an episode with a medium, Siri Bernson, who was on the Netflix Surviving Death docuseries not too long ago. And what she told me was, because I used that word alien, she told me that they don't really like that description. They prefer to be called star beings because alien means apart. And they don't consider themselves apart from us, which I think is interesting. So, curious question about Anzar. First of all, what does he look like? Are you able to get images of him or?
I've seen him in different, not disguises, but he appears differently. Sometimes, like in 1997, when he came to me and called himself the progenitor, he looked like a kind of a proto-human look with this coarse fiber kind of robe. He was revolving in space. It was very theatrical, the way I would describe it. I've also seen him looking kind of like, do you remember Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak? Anyway, the way he drew those beasts, he kind of has that kind of look. And a friend of mine at a CIRO meeting, CIRO is Close Encounter Resource Organization. Her name is Lucy. Anyway, I invited him to come to the meeting to see if anybody could see him, and she did see him. And she described him as looking like a Kachina doll. Southwest Indians have that kind of look. So he has different looks. When I go back to the first time I met him, before I knew he was the progenitor or anything else, he looked more like a classic, very tall, gray alien.
So he's a bit of a chameleon then. He can change the way he presents himself. So you mentioned he had a sense of humor and he had a funny response to the word alien. What did he tell you?
I asked him, is alien a good term? Should we use that term? He said, alien. How would you like to be called an alien? And I said, no. And then he said, look up the definition and tell me if that's what you want to be called. And then, of course, I did. None of the things are that good. As a noun, it's a foreign-born resident, a person who is not of a particular group or place. And then alien used as an adjective is even worse. So I can understand why they don't like it. He does like the term star being, or he suggested
star people,
star family.
Star family, okay.
Part of your star family. And I hadn't heard what you said about the medium that you talked to. It follows in line with that. He said we're all related and we're connected. So we're all part of the same star family. So do you really want to call somebody in your family an alien?
That implies that we are related and that many of us did incarnate from other star systems and worlds and whatever that implies. That's one thing I really don't know a whole lot about, but it is pretty fascinating. I think of Starman, David Bowie. He didn't come from Earth. He had to come from someplace else in a very wonderful way. Same with someone like Prince or John Lennon, and the list goes on.
These are incredibly talented, otherworldly talented people.
I just think he could not have come from here. But what do I know? I'm just guessing.
Well, we all are kind of guessing, Johnny. We all have a little bit of piece, a little bit of stardust in all of us, and we're all trying to figure it out, and we just got to share those puzzle pieces. And that's how we're going to figure it out.
Right. They're like little shards of knowledge, and sometimes those shards are a little bit sharp, so we got to be careful.
Yeah.
When he spoke, was it like an auditory or telepathic? I mean, what was his cadence like? Did he sound like a human, or did he sound like someone that came from planet Anzar?
He has a fairly normal voice. I wouldn't call myself a channeler. I see myself as more of and Anzar called me this, he said, you're a seer. So there's a lot of visual stuff with me. And even with what he says, I can see it. I can see the words that are sometimes in a golden kind of script, which is kind of neat. But I also hear him. And his voice seems fairly normal. And when I tried to imitate his voice for a friend of mine who's a psychic, she said, it sounds like he's straight off the res, as in reservation.
Can you give us an example?
Something like that cadence. Sometimes you hear Native Americans speaking. It's that kind of wonderful cadence they have, like, you are asking me of the stars, which one would I come from? It's just that slow, kind of very deliberate kind of cadence, but with a wry sense of humor as well, which is just wonderful because he's not like speaking with this booming voice. I would say it's more like you're talking to like a medicine man. That's what it would be sounding like. That's what it sounds like to me. Somebody who's very, very wise, but doesn't try to put on airs like a lot of my academic colleagues who try to sound so important and stuff.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that he had a cadence similar to a Native American. Those people are very spiritual.
Yes.
Many of their tribes have many stories, drawings of things that are obviously not of this world. And speaking of things that are not of this world, is it true that some of these star beings or our star family are protecting us from other beings that maybe are not our family?
Yes, there's a couple parts to that. Anzar and groups of others, and not always the same, I guess you would say, different types. They all have different motives, just like all of us have different motives. Some of them are very helpful to us, like Anzar. They're very protective of us. They want to guide us and help us, but not create a dependency on them. That's something that somebody asked me once. They asked me, if they have all this knowledge and power, and why don't they just fix everything? And why don't they fix our environment? And the answer I always get from Anzar is if we did that, what would you learn? You wouldn't learn anything. You have to learn these lessons, and we will help you from destroying yourselves, which is very clear. He did say that they would not allow a planet-wide nuclear war to occur.
Does that mean they're going to step in and hopefully quell this conflict with, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, if it escalates to that point. I've asked him a lot about what's going on currently. He said if they try to use nuclear weapons, and this has actually been proven, the military people have said that they have had UFO sightings and had their nuclear missiles shut down or disrupted or whatever. And so they said that they would stop that. But everything else, as Anzar says, is on us.
By the way, everyone, this episode is being recorded in April 2022, and we're at the brink of the Ukraine-Russia conflict really getting out of hand. That's why I bring that up. We did talk about this last time briefly, that these beings, our star family, will help us from destroying ourselves and have interfered on certain occasions to thwart an attack or just something really getting out of hand.
Yeah. You kind of look at it like what parents do with their children as they grow. The help that you give them when they're tiny is much different than the help you give them when they get a little older. And then eventually they leave the nest. So you have to teach them to be independent, but keep them from destroying themselves at the same time. They want us to grow and take the next leap in our evolution. And we can't do that if they are doing everything for us, which would be like people that pamper their children too much and then they send them out into the world and they're lost. So that's kind of the analogy I use. When I ask Anzar about the other star people who are also part of our family, and let's keep in mind, we have members of our family that aren't very nice humans. I know myself, it's a whole other probably show, but I have a Nazi aunt. She was a real Nazi. She was in the Gestapo in World War II. So obviously she's in my star family, but she's not one of the ones that was helping. those that are not helping. It's an interesting word that Anzar used. He said they are deleterious. He usually doesn't use that kind of language, but he used the word deleterious, so, destructive.
Right. I see the word delete in the root of that word, so I'm thinking that can't be good.
No, it's not. And another interpretation of deleterious is toxic, which is not a nice thing to be toxic. And of course, we all know people who are toxic. Sometimes I don't even know if they know that they're toxic. That's the way they are. So it might not be deliberate. That's just their personality, and they just suck the life out of you. And
very interesting parallel there between parents coddling their kids and eventually having, in some cases, kicking them out to go out and live your life. So it would make sense that they cannot do everything for us. But I think it's good for people to hear that there are beings that are actually looking out for us. Yeah. I don't know when the day is going to come where we hit some type of critical mass where everybody acknowledges, well, actually, there are star beings that are not from Earth, and that's cool. They're not going to hurt us. That might not be for quite some time. So speaking of these beings, obviously they have technology that is much more advanced than what we have. What are the chances that we can actually use some of their technology?
I'm sure you have, or many of your listeners have read The Day After Roswell or Philip Corso's book. He said that a lot of the things that we have may have been reverse engineered or developed from alien technology. When I asked Anzar a while back, before our discussion, I asked him about that, and he said, extraterrestrial technology and wisdom are precious gifts for all, not a strategic advantage for the few. So it's very precise words that he used. So it's not just the matter of what they're going to gift us, but the way in which they're going to gift us. That it's for everybody. It's not just so we can give one side all this stuff and then they're going to do terrible things to the other side, however we divide ourselves. So, and I like the word he used, technology and wisdom, not just the technology, but the wisdom that goes along with it. And we all know that when you talk about weapons, and I grew up in a time when, it was very normal for kids to have 22s, and I lived in the boondocks north of Seattle. So, we would shoot 22s and stuff. Now that's like a horrific thing anybody would think about. But, what it comes with is the knowledge of training, that you know how to use these things and you know how to be safe. Of course, that's a big part of being in the military too, is you learn how to use a lot of weapons, everything from grenades to machine guns and rocket launchers, but you learn the safety that goes with it, and you really learn what the purpose is. It's not some game. So I think there's wisdom that comes with that technology. I know we haven't talked about disclosure, but every government, what they want to do, they know this stuff is real. As one former FBI guy told me, a friend of mine, he said they're trying to desperately figure out how to strap a bomb to this technology. And, like they're talking about the UAPs and stuff that are flying around, and they are trying to figure out a way, well, we could really get a strategic advantage over our enemies if we could strap a bomb to that. And that's not going to be allowed to be used in that way.
I was just about to say that. Could there be some influence that prevents us from using it to our advantage, or for one particular country to use it to their advantage? That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's a very egalitarian approach. And he always tells me this too, because I've had people say, are you sure you're not talking to some kind of demon or something that's trying to influence you negatively? And I said, well, if it is a demon, why would this demon, every time I connect with him, say, be sure to keep love in your heart and always operate from a position of love?
Excellent.
All the things he tells me are very positive and very helpful. That's a demon that's trying to move over to the other side or something, if that's the case.
That sounds like someone who, as an experiment, listened to CNN for a week and stopped watching Fox News.
I do get interesting comments, but yeah, I know that it's real. And kind of a funny story about talking to Anzar. I'll come back and I'll tell my wife, oh, I just talked to Anzar. And she says, oh, that's great. Are you sure you're just not out there talking to yourself? You're a pretty creative guy. I mean, you write comic books, you write stories. Are you sure you're not just out there talking to yourself? I said, no. Other people have seen him. Some of the things he's told me has come to pass, has happened. But I had to laugh. I said, that's very funny. But it is helpful to have that kind of grounding. I don't live with another psychic. I think we drive each other crazy. I like the fact that she's very supportive and believes me, but she's not going to drink the Kool-Aid and jump on the bandwagon.
Now, you mentioned something about the technology and the wisdom. Speaking of the wisdom in particular, does that have anything to do with what you call a leap of consciousness, or is that something else?
That is where this is all leading to, and why they have the approach. They just don't do everything for us is because we need to make this leap of consciousness to evolve to the next level. This leap of consciousness is where everybody realizes we're undergoing it already, and there's already pushback. They show these videos and the fighter pilots talking about this stuff is real, and the government, it seems like every few months they'll come out with something. Like the recent thing is we know that people who've had alien or UFO experiences have suffered physical effects like radiation burns. That was the recent one that just came out, that the Department of Defense has acknowledged this. And it's kind of a vindication for a lot of people who have been talking about this and have been ignored. It kind of reminds me of the movie, it's a Will Smith movie, where they got the Vietnam pilot who lives in a trailer with his kids, and he's been talking about being probed by aliens or whatever, and people just think he's nuts, right? And then all of a sudden the aliens are here, and then he's kind of vindicated. So I think there is a lot of that going on. A lot of people who have questioned their own sanity. These poor people who've had these experiences, they desperately want people to acknowledge that it's real because of the alternative. It's that something is wrong with them. That being said, there are people who are mentally ill. I have a theory about that too that I don't want to digress too much, but anyway.
This is all interesting stuff because any way you look at it, there's rabbit holes everywhere. You had also mentioned that Anzar had told you some things that actually did come to pass. Can you give us a couple examples?
Yeah, the killing of George Floyd and then the subsequent political unrest. Some people would call them riots. Some people would call them protests. Political unrest. Let's just leave it at that. He didn't give me like exact names and dates. This was before that Memorial Day. He told me that there's going to be political unrest. And he said there's going to be a pocket revolution. I'm a historian. And I've studied politics. I've never heard that term used before, pocket revolution. Then in October, just before the presidential election, he told me that there would be, he used the word insurrection. He said that it's going to be serious enough to where it's going to create a constitutional crisis here in the United States. But he said it's spreading around the world too, that this instability is spreading. So of course, the morning of January 6th, and I know people that had different interpretations of January 6th, but let's just say that it was a very unpleasant thing that happened with a few extremists. There might have been a lot of people who were upset about the election, but there were a few people who kind of took things kind of a vigilante style. That morning, before all that happened, I had a very clear vision of me back in the military again, back in the Army, and I was in this circular structure. It was outside, and there was these columns, and I was in a military unit, and we were told, okay, we got to face the enemy. And I said, who's the enemy? And they said, look. And I saw inside of this building that had these columns, which now I know is the Capitol building. In the dream, it was more surrealistic. And I looked through the windows and I turned to the guy next to me and I said, that's us. This is not an enemy. Those are American people. They're just like us. And he said, no, that's the enemy. Then the next thing I know, violence broke out. This is the kind of stuff that happens. He will give me information. And the other thing is before COVID, he said there'd be a series of calamities that would strike worldwide. And he said millions of people will die. Now, he didn't mention COVID, but he said a series of calamities, which of course, we're still undergoing those calamities.
I think so.
So those are the things. I did share them on Facebook openly, and I was attacked. It kind of reminds me of the old time tunnel show where they'd go back in time and try to stop the Titanic from hitting the icebergs. People think they're nuts. Hey, put this guy, lock him up in the brig. When you try to help people, oftentimes you get attacked for it. I got accused of being ultra left-wing. I got accused of being ultra right-wing. And in reality, I'm not political at all. I'm really much in the middle. Eventually, it caused so much trouble, I just stopped doing that online, but I shared it with the members of CIRO, the Close Encounter Resource Organization. So I shared all this information with them. And even some members of that group were upset by it. So I had to get an even narrower group within there, and I'd share it with them. And the former attorney and state attorney told me, at first I wasn't sure what to think about Anzar, but now I listen. And when you get something that he tells you, I listen to it. So there's always going to be a level of skepticism. I always tell people, I say, I might be interpreting it wrong. I could be lost in translation. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. But most of the time, he's pretty much right on, and I've been able to share that. And I'm more than happy to do it. And I'm willing to take the criticism for it. So I figured Facebook was not the place to do it.
Probably not.
There's too much craziness going on there. And
what are the most important takeaways from Anzar, and what has he said recently? Things that we might want to be aware of? I'm almost afraid to ask this, but I guess I have to.
I'm not going to say anything that's not true or try to put rosy colored glasses on it or anything, but I do like to give people hope. And I'll go back to this idea of the leap of consciousness. There'll be a lot of turmoil before most everybody's on board and we take that evolutionary step. Once we do that, and I can't predict when that'll be, we'll enter into an era of reconversion. He said that's when you take the wisdom of the ancient people and you combine it with everything you've learned, all science and technology and these wondrous achievements that we have. You'll live in a much more peaceful and pleasant age. So this era of reconversion is what we're heading towards. Is a perilous journey, as most journeys are. They're not all smooth sailing. So I want to say that just so what I'm going to say now, people don't run screaming out of their homes. And
give us the unfiltered version.
It's heading to something good. Okay, here's the terrible stuff that's going to happen. A World War III type situation. I think we know who the players are already. China, Iran, and Russia. They're already buddy-buddy, although maybe they haven't announced their engagement yet, but they're getting married. It's going to cause a lot of conventional warfare. It's going to get to a tactical nuclear level, which kind of contradicts what I said earlier, that they're going to stop us from destroying each other. But let's keep in mind, there are tactical nukes are miniaturized down to the size of a briefcase or a backpack. They also have artillery rounds that are nuclear rounds. So those are considered tactical or battlefield nukes. Now, those are terrible things. And they will cause radiation sickness, but in a smaller area. It's not going to spread around the world necessarily. Also, chemical and biological weapons could happen as well. He said there's going to be a terrible nuclear accident. So I thought it was when they took over Chernobyl. They were bombing it and stuff. Apparently, the radiation levels were normal, but now I guess they had dug trenches around there, so now there's a problem. So I'm not sure if that's it or if there's another accident coming up involving maybe Iran or China, but he used the term accident in terms of the virus. It's going to continue to mutate. It's not going away. Those are things that he tells me to expect. And just in general, he says preparations are always better than predictions. So I'm just telling you this stuff for preparation's sake, for the idea that you should prepare, whether it's an electrical grid attack. We're very vulnerable here in the United States to an attack on our electrical grid, a cyber attack. But I'll go back to the other thing he said, which is that the leap of consciousness will come when everybody is able to keep love in their heart and operate from a position of love, which sounds far from where we're at right now.
It really does.
It's easier said than done. There's challenges every single day that challenge that. Somebody will do something that's just so horrible, and oh man, I'm just really, mad at that person. Then you think, well, why are they doing it? Then you start to approach it from a different perspective. They could be very much in pain and just don't realize that they're hurting other people, or they're doing it for some other reason. Maybe they can be convinced not to do that. That's an important part of that leap of consciousness, is understanding the role that each of us has in making things better. That's why I always tell my students, I end every class with, be sure to keep love in your heart and make good things happen as you make history. These young students, they desperately want something. So I want to give them something that they can hang on to and empower them. I've had a couple of them look me up online and, you don't talk about this stuff in class, do you? And I said, well, if you ask me, I'll talk about it. But no, I don't. I'm not trying to sell my Anzar book.
Not your students anyway. I think that's a good way to end your classes. Keep love in your hearts and use it to create great things.
Yeah, to make good things happen. If everybody did that, if everybody woke up in the morning and said, what can I do today to make things better for myself, my family, my community, my world, or whatever, if everybody was doing that, it would be so much better. But it's hard to do. That's really hard to do.
I think that this is partially inspired by your Star Being friends, because I've heard this before. They want us to become more loving people. which is the opposite of what we might have seen in comic books or these horror shows growing up. So, Bruce, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Johnny.
How do our listeners find out more about you online?
My website is bruceolavsolheim.com, and my middle name is spelled O-L-A-V. Last name S-O-L-H-E-I-M. So bruceolavsolheim.com. All my books and other things that I'm doing are there.
I will put that in the show notes and the transcripts. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. You can also leave us a review on iTunes as well. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.